to be.
Ooh, a countdown.
I know. It's pleasantly surprising.
By the way, how's my volume right now? Because Jared was saying something about it earlier. Is it okay?
Could you bump it a little more?
Yeah.
Bump it a little more? Okay. What about this? Is this better?
Just a smidgen.
Just a smidgen more?
Yeah,
Okay, how about this?
How's my audio?
it's good.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
One final test. Testing 1, 2, 3.
All right.
Maybe a little more. A little more.
I'm at 92, or let's go 95. How about this?
Okay, that's better.
What if I come too close though? Then it gets
Okay.
too loud, right?
That's a little too loud.
Yeah, but it's very soothing. It's like soothing and loud at the same time. Like, I don't know.
When you did the really
Should
deep voice
consider
really
some
close to the mic like
ASMR.
this.
Welcome,
Feross.
welcome to the Feross ASMR show. I will be your host this evening.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. All right. Well, all right. So let's get started. We've made people like wait long enough. All right. So I'm gonna play our intro music and Tobie Langel. I don't think I've ever said your last. I've like been friends with you for years. I don't
Yeah.
even know like have I ever pronounced your name like your
That was
last name? I don't
bad.
even know.
It wasn't the
Okay.
worst, but
I-
it was bad.
okay.
Either just like Americanize it, like say
Okay.
it
No.
like Langel,
Well,
or say it French way, which is
Okay.
Langel.
Langel. Alors, en
That's
français,
funny.
c'est bien. Ok. Tobie Langel,
Oh God,
mon
this is gonna
ami,
make me sound so
il
sexy.
habite à Geneva, you know? Yeah, he actually does live in Geneva. Do you live in Geneva? Geneva,
I do.
Geneva, right? Yeah, okay. All right,
But
we'll get
wait.
started.
Is it
Yeah.
Langel? Is that how you pronounce it?
It is.
Okay. I didn't know that.
I feel like
No.
there's an L and an E that's missing from there in order for it to like really make sense, but whatever. We're not going to
No,
go there.
It's just
Wait,
like
Your name
Langel?
doesn't
German
make any
roots here.
sense to us.
Okay, we're going to get started.
Let's
All
get
right.
started.
Let's do this. Can you hear hopefully you can hear the music. Yes. Hello, party people. Welcome to a very special and extra informative show with a stunning panel. We have with us today Feross. Welcome.
Welcome. Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we've missed you. You've been like busy teaching like web security to like undergrads at Stanford or something. Like, what's going on? Like, we haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, it was a pretty busy time, but hopefully be back on the show a little bit more this year.
Yeah, we're very excited. And also congratulations on your recent engagement. I had to call you out on that. You know it. So really happy
I knew
for
you were going to do
both.
that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Amal.
Oh wait, your fiance is a surprise guest on the show. Did you? No, I'm just kidding. We're not. No, but really, we're so happy for you, and we're so happy that we'll be seeing more of you again this year. And with us on the panel as well today is our like resident open source. I would say, like, I don't even know. I was going to say open source curmudgeon, but I don't know if that's like appropriate. So I don't. Is it?
I prefer, to think of myself as a generalist.
Okay. Generalist curmudgeon. There we go. Chris Heller. Welcome, Chris.
Hello.
Hello. And our very special guest today is Tobie Langel.
Good job.
Did I do a good job?
Yeah,
Yeah.
spot on.
All right, awesome. So Tobie is I don't even know if I can do a justice for introducing Tobie. So he's just a long time, I would say, advocate and expert within like open source ecosystems. He really gets like, I don't know what open governance means. He's helped some really large scale open source projects land in foundations. He runs a consultancy, helping various organizations kind of, adapt open source like within like open source strategies and whatnot. So I don't know, but Tobie, I'm not doing you any justice. So in your own words, why don't you introduce yourself and tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Well, I mean, originally I'm actually a JavaScript developer.
Oh yeah, that too.
That's my background, right?
Yeah.
So given the name of the show, I think I should mention that, but it was a long time ago. It was before jQuery was famous. That dates me. So essentially, I'm now in an industry that grew like really quickly. I am essentially experienced. So I guess that's my title at this point, and which is a nice way of saying old.
That's really cool. And we've invited you on today's show to really kind of help us unpack some things that have affected many of our projects recently. There was an incident within the open source ecosystem, specifically the JavaScript ecosystem, a few weeks ago, where was a maintainer that was, doing some things to their packages, and it really affected all like a lot of downstream consumers. So, without like, doing a bad version of telling the story, Tobie, what can you just like walk us through like what happened, and then we'll get into trying to unpack some of the.
Okay,
fallout.
so I'm going to try to do my best to do a short version of that, especially because I wasn't super interested about exactly what happened in that specific instance, because like these issues have become like fairly common at this point. But essentially what happened is a developer, there are different ways of looking at the story. You can look at the backstory or just what happened recently. So essentially what happened recently is a number of dependencies that people were relying on, in general, like deep down in the dependency tree, essentially got sabotaged by their owner. And I want to put quotes around the term here. That was backed with sort of a call to arms of making open source more sustainable and paying developers. And regardless of whether that's actually specifically true in an alleged claim in that particular case, and that's debatable, right? And people can have opinions about this. It's still, I mean, this is still something that I believe is really critical that we start addressing in the ecosystem, and also that we start like really seeing the impact, right? And the impact here was very real. It was very colorful. It also could have been like very bad, and it was kind of lucky, is my perspective, that like the only thing that happened here was what happened, i.e. Essentially a bunch of like gibberish in logs and some DOSing of apps as they were being deployed, which is bad, right? But it's fairly possible. I mean, at least like, let's say that if someone was actually wanting to do something very like much worse than that, they probably wouldn't be, talking openly about it on Twitter. And so it's kind of, to me at least, we have to look at it as a wake-up call, right? Of, hey, look at how this whole thing is working. Look at all of what we're taking for granted. And frankly, like, is it really secure? Is it really safe? Is it sustainable? And, the answer to that at this point are kind of obvious.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that really wonderful summary. I mean, just for our listeners, like, we're not here to kind of like really poo-poo over like the specifics of what happened, in terms of like this developer did this exact thing. I think for us, I think the wider takeaway for today is really that this is just one of many potential things, but also it was literally also one of many things that happened with the same developer over a short period of time. And so like, how do we kind of like unpack that and react to, some clear vulnerabilities in our processes, in our like systems, and in our just even like knowledge base as engineers, right? Like there's a lot of gaps here, and we hope to kind of discuss some of that. And I'm really excited to also have just kind of a wonderful panel of people to discuss this with, because even though Tobie's our guest today, Feross and Chris are both pretty seasoned open source developers and maintainers of, and fairly widely adopted projects. So Feross and Chris, like, I'm eager to hear from both of you as well. Thoughts on the kind of context for what happened?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just second what Tobie said. I think we've been super lucky with the types of attacks that we've seen so far. It could be much worse than than what we saw in this particular attack. I think we're starting to see these kinds of supply chain attacks happen on a much more regular basis. It's sort of picked up in 2021, and it hasn't really let go since. I think I see like a headline about something like this like every 2 weeks, it seems like, sometimes even more frequently. And if you look at the kind of packages that are being affected, they're all these pretty headline grabbing numbers in terms of downloads. So the two packages in this incident were Faker, which has 10 million downloads a month, and Color, which has 100 million downloads a month. But we've also seen attacks against UA Parser.js and Koa, and as well as RC. And all of those packages had at least 30 million downloads a month each. And so, when malware makes it into one of these packages through whatever mechanism, in this case, it happened to be the maintainer themselves who added the malware. In the case of, the three I just mentioned, UA Parser.js, Koa, and RC, those ones were actually, a third party who got access to the modules and added malware to them. In all of these cases, I feel like the attacks have been pretty naive and caught pretty quickly. We're not really looking at like super sophisticated actors here. In the case of Faker and Color, it was a very obvious it was very obvious that something had happened because the packages were outputting gibberish code, infinite loops, sort of outputting the Unicode text to sort of it was very obvious that something had happened to the package. And then in the case of the three I mentioned earlier, all of those were pretty obvious as well. They were crypto miners added to the modules. So when you updated your CPU usage would just go straight to 100%, and it would be mining crypto for the attacker. And so this isn't like a super sophisticated thing. It's sort of gets caught within a couple of days. Someone notices, the malware gets removed from npm, and then we write a bunch of news stories about it and people talk about it. There have been hints at like much more scary attacks. If you go back to 2018 with EventStream, the EventStream incident was a much more sophisticated bit of obfuscated code added to one of Dominic Tarr's packages when he gave up the package to another maintainer to take over after he was done working on it. And in that case, that was an attack that targeted one very specific company, and it was a no-op for everybody else. And so that went undetected for much, much longer. And so I just think it's interesting that we haven't seen anything like that sophisticated since 2018, which makes me think, either people just have forgotten that those things exist, or maybe we're just not finding them, which is the much scarier thought. So,
do you have a perspective on that? Because I'm kind of curious about this. I feel like, given how fragile the whole ecosystem feels, I'm very surprised that there was not a lot more going on than what's going on right now. So like, are people like genuinely just in general really good and like this doesn't happen? Or do we have like sufficient layers that it doesn't happen that much? Or is lots of things happening that we're just not aware of?
I mean, that's a great question. That's a really, really, really good question. I mean, one thing is that the attacks against NPM packages aren't very sneaky, because once you publish a version, it gets replicated into all these other registries that people have. Everyone is sort of replicating NPM to their mirroring. Yeah, exactly. And so it's not like you're going to get away with it. Really, eventually it's going to be discovered, and so there's an element of that. And then I also do think that you're right that most people are good. I mean, we're talking about most people who write open source are doing it for good reasons. They get into it for good reasons, for one reason or another. And so it's pretty rare that they want to try to do something bad. It's more, I feel like, external actors coming in and trying to get access to people's packages. But yeah, I don't know. It's an open question. I wonder what other people think.
Yeah. So like for me, like honestly, like this, like the fragility of our ecosystem, just purely in terms of like the fact that like, there are packages on npm that are downloaded millions of times, a week, but they, don't have 2FA or, have a single maintainer, like single point of failure in some ways, right? Like, what if this person dies and they don't have like a death plan or whatever? And like, what then? Or, like it just, for me, like the human element is like has always been like the question mark for me around like, like we are like temporal beings, like, our resilience is like in community and like in social networks and like, like should we be seeing a maintainer of one as a liability? Like, I don't know, like, these are like the types of things that like I worry about, especially for stadium projects. But,
Can you please like define a stadium project?
oh yeah, sure. Yeah. So stadium projects are like, typically one or a small group of maintainers like controlling a project that is consumed by many people, right? So like React.js is like a good example of a stadium project, but React.js has like a team and more importantly also like a company and like a whole set of processes and all these other things behind them, right? You have lots of examples, especially within the Node community, of like stadium projects where there's like one maintainer, or maybe like a maintainer has passed it on to like a group of two people, right? But they have millions of downstream dependencies. I'm sure like Feross and Chris can think of a few right off the top of their heads, like if you want to share some good examples of that.
Does this term come from Nadia's book, Working in Public?
It
Yes.
does, yeah.
Okay.
Nadia Iqbal, yeah.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So it's I think she had like 4 different projects, and we can like link to that in the show notes. And actually speaking of Nadia, like Tobie had brought up, I think in his initial kind of, he had a Twitter thread on this that was very interesting that we'll also put in the show notes. But Nadia kind of talks about open source as like the roads and bridges, that like are these invisible things that actually help our entire digital world go around, right? And so we think about the importance that open source plays in our day-to-day lives and interactions with, all the software that we use, on our TVs, phones, etc., in our airplanes, right? And like, the importance, and then like the actual attention that we pay to it in terms of like contribution, resilience, awareness, whatever, like the mind share and the importance, like they don't really balance and they don't add up. So I'm curious, like, if you have any thoughts on that giant gap, Tobie.
So that was a great segue, right? Nadia wrote this really important piece in 2017 called Roads and Bridges. I can't remember what the subtitle was. The unpaid
like
labor, unpaid labor behind our digital infrastructure, I think. And the notion. I think it's really important that we start thinking about open source and this whole pool of software as the infrastructure to the digital revolution, right? The third industrial revolution. Its infrastructure is, in a large part, not only, right, there's the internet, there's a bunch of things, but the open source pool of software is clearly infrastructure, right? And so I actually gave a short presentation 2 days ago on this topic, and I just essentially I was really quickly after this original thread, and so I decided to just use the Twitter thread and use that as a deck, right? And so I was missing a title, and I quickly came up with a title that was something along the lines of "Open Source as Public Infrastructure." It's about time we treat it as such, or something of that nature. And I tweeted that so that I could actually have the title for the first slide of my Twitter deck, right? And like people went like really like it was so tense, the responses to that tweet that wasn't supposed to be a tweet. It was just, I was just using it as sort of a scratch pad. There's this really tense culture and really a strong difference in perspective between the North America really and Europe in terms of what public infrastructure is, and whether it's something useful and great that we sort of like can rely on in our daily life as individuals and as businesses, and the opposite perspective in the U.S. where it's just like you think of it as like broken bridges and like potholes and all of that stuff, right? And so there's like a real tension there. But regardless of like how we are actually thinking of public infrastructure, and I don't want to, I want to think of, I don't want to really say like public infrastructure to imply must be owned and operated by the government, right? I really mean it sort of like in a broader, more loose way, in terms of like, this is what we build our things on today. And I'm not trying to imply like specific solutions that are tied to like more taxes and the government like owning open source, right? Like not at all, right? But clearly, we do have to start thinking about it as like building blocks of what we're building today, what the digital world is all about. And I don't think we're quite doing that right now. We're just hoping for the best, crossing our fingers, and we're not really considering that these are the roads and bridges. And right now they're maintained. This famous XKCD comic was like this whole sort of like elaborate structure, and there's like the tiny piece at the bottom that sort of like holds everything up, right? And it said that the legend is like, this piece is maintained by like one developer on their own time in Nebraska or something like that, right? And like I think we have to acknowledge that this is a problem, and it's been a problem for a while, but now that we're actually being impacted, like really impacted by security problems that this is creating, people are starting to pay attention, which is good, right? Because of security problems, we're going to be able to solve what is also sort of like a human problem of people doing work and not being paid for it. So I'm all for that.
Break. Okay. Sorry. That was like the perfect ending, and like everything else that we could have talked to you about was going to segue us for like another 10 minutes. So yeah, solid. For us and Chris and Tobie, do you need a bathroom break or like water or stretch break or anything? We're good. Like, can we keep it roughly rolling? Yeah. Okay. So Tobie, that was like a perfect segue. So we can, what was this last sentence that you just said? It was
that we can sort of leverage security concerns.
Yeah, I was too busy like waving my hands to like, okay, leverage security concerns. Okay, perfect.
To actually solve the human problem.
To solve problems. Okay, perfect. So let's pick up there. So what I'd like to do is like use that as a springboard to get into like, okay, so this was actually horrible that it happened, but it's been happening. So now it happened like maybe this is like the camel that like the last straw that like brought this to surface, and like what are we gonna do about it, right? Like
this is
I mean, like this is for us. For us is like laughing and giggling. He's like nope, this is definitely not the last straw, Mel. Trust me. Like like the stock market has to officially crash in order for that to happen, for people to start caring about open source. Anyways, okay, no, let's not. Yeah, this is not gonna be on the show. Like this is on YouTube though. So hello YouTube. All right, so we'll just pick back up from there, and then for us, we can jump into like security stuff, like some of the like stuff that you wanted to bring up like at some point in this segment. So just jump in whenever you feel like it makes sense.
We'll start with the sustainability stuff, right? Or I'll just
we're starting with sustainability stuff in mindset. Yes. Okay. Wait, so just so we're on the same page, we're going. This is such a broad topic. Like I like hate that I'm trying to fit this into such a short amount of time. So we're going with security, like this important. So like now what do we do about it to like actually care, right? Or to fix this, which is
like what do we do about the sustainability problem?
Yeah, the sustainability problem. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And then security.
And then security. Sounds like a plan. Let's do this. Okay. So Tobie, that was a really great kind of point to end on, because really you're absolutely right. Until we kind of like feel the burn from the fire, usually don't learn, right? However, like Feross pointed out, we're right. Yeah, exactly. But Feross pointed out, like, this has been happening. This is not new. We like make a little fuss, news articles come out, we move on and forget about it, right? It's like the the attention deficit disorder of the internet, like, and just also our complete and utter bias towards just moving forward, right? Like it's like somehow we've all embraced the meta mission of like break it and don't think about it and move on. Like, I don't know.
So
So
so I'm going to make the argument that like it's different this time.
okay, I hope
And I'm
so.
not quite sure why, but I think it has to do with the fact that there was a convergence of issues. I think the sustainability drum has of like the ecosystem has been like beaten on quite a bit, and people have started to pay attention, but they're like, okay, people are not getting paid. They're it's like this whole thing feels kind of weird and unfair, but what can we do about it? And then there's been sort of like on the other side, sort of like security concerns, right? Like as Feross was talking about earlier. And suddenly it feels like these two emerging. Like people are sort of like looking at this and looking at that and saying, "Oh, wait,
Oh, the two are
there's a
related.
connection between the two."
Yeah.
Right?
What? The right
Exactly.
and the left belong to the same body?
Exactly.
Yes, yes.
And
Yes,
like
I get it.
I do sort of like these long threads about the open source ecosystem like on a regular basis, and they usually get like reasonable traction, right? This one didn't get a lot of Twitter traction, but oh my God, did my phone ring, right? I had a whole bunch of folks reach out and say, we're still dealing with the log4j, sorry, thing, and trying to figure out where.
Log4j.
Yeah, isn't that a good one?
Do not
try to-
npm install that. Just kidding. Yeah, wait, is that what you're gonna say?
Don't pin that one on the JavaScript community. We're not responsible for that one.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm
Thank
sorry.
you.
That
Thank
was-
you.
It's just like I don't know what happened.
That's somebody else's crap. Anyways.
No, but like people. I think there's another thing too. It's the software bills of material. The conversation around the I don't know what you call it in English, as BOM, SBOM, whatever the name for that thing is. But the fact that there's been a White House executive order or like document of some sorts. I don't really know what the terms are around security questions, specifically mentioning open source. What is it called? No
It
one
was
else knows?
there was an executive order that the Biden administration put out at the beginning of 2021 about the software bill of materials.
Right. So yeah, it wasn't that far off
And then there was
on that topic.
a White House meeting.
Right.
Or, I don't know if that happened or what.
It
if
has.
did.
I
What
think
came
so.
of it? Like
Yeah.
anything to announce?
So I mean,
I don't know.
I don't know, but there's clearly like a convergence of concerns around this topic, and I think the fact that a lot of organizations have started building software bills of materials, and they're looking at their stack, and they're like, oh my God, we're pulling in like tens of thousands of dependencies. Like we had no idea that we were putting in all that stuff. I think this has impacted the psyche of folks quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
And people are legit like concerned about this.
Yeah,
Right.
it's kind of like it's like folks suddenly like looked at the shopping bags that they just came home with, or actually take it back. They just looked at the shopping bags that have been like in their car for the past like, I don't know, 10, 15 years and just decided, you know what? Let me just take a look at the label and just like what are the ingredients in here? What are these clothes made of or whatever, right? And it's like,
Right.
oh, whoa, wow, I didn't realize there were like so many threads of so many different kinds of fabric, and oh, guess what? Oh, all of these fabrics have different laundry settings, and oh, like some of them age like differently. Oh, some of them have their own set of like mini fabrics, like, right? It's like the crazy recursive dependency tree, which quite frankly, to me, we can poo-poo on it all we want, but like I think, open source is working, right? Like open source, like we want people to write less code in the sense that like well, I think the statistics, like the last time I checked, maybe at least a couple of years ago, the statistics were around like for every one line of application code a software engineer writes, like there's 10 lines of code in their open source dependencies that are running, right? So like that's a really good ratio. Like that's not that people should not see that as a sign of weakness, right? It means that you're focusing on the problems that you need to solve for your specific customers, and we're relying on code that's more secure and reused and maintained, and you're reducing surface area and we're able to move faster, right? So open source is working, but what's missing, I think, is our hygiene around open source, and the resilience and our sustainability around open source. Like that's where we're failing. So what do we need to do to be more resilient? Like both on the organizational level, right, for like the Fortune 10 companies, right, but also as individuals that are also using these things, like using these packages or using these libraries, like how do we tackle this giant sustainability problem that's been very very under addressed, right?
So, I mean, I don't know if there, there's lots of questions here.
Okay.
And I mean, one aspect is the sustainability of the ecosystem. The fact that these new issues that we've seen happen sort of like helps make the case for addressing underlying sustainability issues in the ecosystem that folks in the ecosystem are well aware of, but aren't finding good solutions for, because it wasn't of broad interest. Because, well, free stuff that works, who cares, right? Like free stuff that explodes in your face, you're like, oh, well, maybe now we should start looking into it, right? So I think we're moving towards the free stuff that explodes in your face kind of situation right now. So that's a really interesting aspect, is to see how we can leverage, this new concern to actually try to find systemic solutions in the ecosystem itself. And then the other aspect is, well, from the perspective of a consumer, like what can we of open source software, right? How can we think about our practices differently? How can we think about our interaction with the broader open source ecosystem differently? And then what can we put in place to actually build a more secure and more resilient usage of that open source? And so, like, I really sort of like see these two different. And I'm way less. I mean, we have like really good experts on the second topic on this show. So I'm way less of an expert on the security aspects of it. So I don't know, like, if where you'd like to start. What's this?
Yeah, I would say maybe we'll have to. I'd say like we definitely need to get into the security aspect of this, like in this podcast. But I would say maybe we start with the first one and then we'll work our way there. Like
They're connected, of course, right? I mean,
of course,
but,
yeah.
but they're clearly like two distinct. So I mean, I'm happy to sort of give a quick overview of like the sustainability problems in the space and kind of like what we've tried to do. So it's been a while. I think it's really when there was the Heartbleed bug that folks really started paying attention to open source sustainability, and there was a bunch of efforts following that, and also a bunch of companies actually trying to address the problem. And the problem really is one of, well, I mean, I think the key problem in the open source space, and it's a problem in tech in general, right, is that we all love building new features, because like building new features is really cool and that's highly valued, both in open source and within companies. But then when it comes to actually like making sure that they stay up to date, that they're sustained and maintained through time, like this is less valued, right? Just like we value documentation writing less than we value code writing, we value maintaining stuff a lot less than we value new features. So I think that's part of part of what has been uncovered for a long time. And as a result, you have companies that have built on businesses on top of that. Like the famous one, obviously, is Red Hat, right? But that works really well for sort of really well-known software that we interact with. I mean, open source software that we interact with directly. When you look at the whole dependency tree that's behind it, well, the long tail, it's you can't build like a Red Hat business model for color.js. Right? Like literally, I mean, literally, no one's going to buy this. from you.
Don't challenge the internet. But
Well, no,
I mean,
sure,
there-
but I mean,
there-
you can't
there's-
do that at scale.
There's a company called Tidelift that's trying to do that. I think they're even a sponsor of the JS Party or one of the changelog podcasts.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there's definitely people trying.
Yes.
And they sort of want to like provide this like blanket guarantee for like all your open source. But yeah, it's a much harder problem than what Red Hat's doing. That's for sure.
Right. And then the other problem that we have here is one of scale, right? When we're talking about, if you're talking about was the number that you used before, so one line of code that you write relies on 10 lines of external code, of open source code, right? And then if you look at sort of like the money that we're talking about in terms of like what's being spent in the open source ecosystem to sort of maintain it, and what's being spent on developers writing code, the discrepancy is mind-boggling, right? I did some back of the envelope math a while back for a talk I was giving on this topic. Back then, Tidelift had announced, I think, a $22 million
funding round.
Thank you. About 1 million of which they were planning to put back in the ecosystem to fund the maintainers, right? Open Collective was giving, that's like 2-3 years ago, was sort of redistributing roughly around $1 million a year or two, right? And if you do back of the envelope math of what the overall envelope for developers in the world is, right? There's roughly 20 million developers in the world, roughly. If you look at, like an average salary, you're looking at about $1 trillion spent on developers per year, compared to $1 or $2 million on open source. And if you compare that with like, the one order of magnitude for code lines of code, you already see the, how huge that discrepancy is. And just to picture what $1 million means, I actually use a bunch of diagrams in that talk. $1 million in $100 bills is about like a stack of money that you could fit on your desk, like, $10 million, right? You can fit that on your desk. To get to $1 trillion, you have to stack the same $100 bills to the size of a skyscraper, like a real skyscraper of $100 bills. That gives you an idea of like the massive difference in spending.
Yeah.
And of course, there are lots of companies contributing with engineer time, right? I don't want to discount that at all, and that's actually very important. But even though that we have effort in this ecosystem to, in our industry to try to sustain open source, they're completely tiny compared to what's going, to what the needs would be, right? And so we haven't seen much progress.
Yeah. So I would argue it's not just financial though, Tobie. Like for me, it's actually like in terms of mind share and awareness and thinking, like we don't think much about our roads and bridges, right? We don't think much about the open source packages and their packages and their packages and their packages, right? Like specifically even just in our processes, right? Like this whole incident that happened with Marak's packages, Color.js and Faker, like they I think were like one of many other examples, but like it was an example of a clear need for better resilience in the way we even consume our packages, right? Because you had folks who were literally having like build failures or whatever. Like why are shouldn't we have processes that check and gate and make sure that like our builds and our tests and our apps still function before like automatically ingesting a new set of dependencies? Like I'm just saying that there's steps there, but I think even more so the driving factor more often than not is actually on the security front, with not just like have I introduced a bug with this new patch that I didn't really like fully test, So I don't know, for us, you maybe want to share some insights on like some security best practices.
Yeah, I mean, I can. I mean, I'll just start by saying that what we're trying to do here is actually pretty crazy problem. I mean, we basically what's going on is people are downloading code from the internet, from written by people who they don't know, that they've never met, and they're executing it on their laptops and on their production servers, and they're hoping that that goes well. Which is, when you put it like that, actually, it's mind-boggling that that not only does it mostly work, which is a testament to how good most people are, but it's also it's just a lot of trust that people put in, and it's sort of like people just don't think about that that's what they're doing very often. So it's crazy. It's mind-boggling. It's astounding. I don't know what words to use, but we download random code from the internet. We run it on our computers. We don't even bother reading it first most of the time. And
Not that it
and
would
then
help that much.
And most of the time is like that. It's like actually like the 5 nines most of the time, like 99.999% of the time. Like yeah, just like trust.
Yeah, and it's it mostly works. The problem is that when it goes wrong, it goes really wrong. I mean, I'm running these NPM modules that I've downloaded, and I'm doing it on the same computer where I keep all my tax returns and all of my photos and everything precious to me in my entire life, like my most personal information, and it's running in the same machine. And so there's all sorts of questions that come up around just like, is this really the best way to be doing things? Is there not some way to sandbox things better? Is there not some way to get more certainty about what a package will do before we run it? So there's an infinite number of things we could talk about in this area. I think there's also people kind of proposing their various solutions. Some people think that code signing is the solution, or 2FA is the solution. So there's all kinds of things we could talk about. I think the most interesting thing to think about really here is this idea that modules are pretty opaque right now, and so even if you want to do the right thing and review the code, it's not really easy to do. This code is open source, like it's open. The word open is there in the name, but like almost no one actually uses that to go and read the code and to go and take responsibility for the code. They just assume that it's gonna be fine, and this isn't helped by NPM. I mean, if you go to the NPM website, you'll notice there's this Explore tab there that when you click it, it just says this feature's broken or coming soon or something like that, and it doesn't even show you the files inside of the NPM package. So you can't even see what you're going to run. You're left to resort to clicking on the GitHub link, going over to GitHub, and hoping that the code on GitHub happens to be the same as the code that's on the NPM registry. And there's literally no guarantee that that is the case.
Yeah, there is no guarantee.
So we're dealing
that's
with
one of the other chain links that's a little broken in our like in our security trust chain. Like that for me, I've always seen that as a major loophole. Like the fact that like that like the code, like there's no true secure chain between the contract that between NPM and wherever the code is published, because it's not even required that the code is published on GitHub. First of all, that's also like a fallacy. And then like there's no actual spec or checks or validation to make sure that the code is actually the same as whatever repository is specified in the like package.json file, right? So like so there's like so many there's a lot of blind trust and like giving strangers access to unsandboxed environments with lots of secrets for multi-billion dollar, multi-trillion dollar corporations. Like, if your security company doesn't have like a good, like,
people's data.
People's data too. Like, thank you for, forget the corporations, really. Who cares about them? It's actually like people that get affected, like when these things happen too.
I mean, both on your machine, right, as a developer, but also when you're pushing that to your app that is hosting data from your your clients.
Right. Yeah. Chris, I see you making faces.
Yeah.
I can't tell if you're like, I want to talk. See,
Yes,
Chris,
I
it's
do.
like you're such a polite gentleman, like I just blindly interrupt people all the time. But like honestly, for me, it's like it's almost uncontrollable. It's like actually a problem. So I just want to say I really appreciate your politeness. I really do, Chris.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't want to pull us too far off,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
so we talking about there's no like you got this GitHub repo, you got this package on npm. I mean, you could say that the code you're publishing to npm comes from this GitHub repo, but
Yeah.
you could throw anything in that tarball and upload it to npm.
Of course. Yeah.
So some other ecosystems do this, right? I think maybe Go does it, and certain Linux distributions have the thing where they don't like give you packages, they give you source code, and you have to compile it yourself. Is that sort of thing? I mean, yes, it's going to be more inconvenient, slower, what have you. But maybe avoiding registries entirely and going right to the source, pulling down your source and building it yourself is a reasonable strategy to mitigate some of this.
Well, I mean, doesn't that require that you actually read the code? I mean,
Yes.
Doesn't that require that we also have hygiene and like actually give some thought to like our dependency tree and how
However,
we,
I mean, so maybe if there was some more, so
these
sure,
gaps.
you could go that far and go and read the code. And if you go and you clone, say, any project published to npm, you go clone, you get a working copy. How that project is built is going to vary from it's going to be different scripts, like there's going to be all sorts of different ways to do that. And furthermore, there are all the dependencies that it has as well, right? And so if you're going to do something like that, you would have to like go and grab all those dependencies, get the source code, and figure out how to build all those, right? And then you can build the project that you wanted to build in the first place. And maybe, maybe that makes sense. Maybe, certainly some projects don't need to be built, but, maybe like more standardization around, okay, this is how you build a JavaScript project. This is the command you run,
Yeah.
and it will work. It should work. And
Yeah.
I don't know. Just an idea, but
You mean standards? You
yeah,
mean standards,
I mean
Chris?
some
Is this
standards
all right?
because we
So
don't have a lot in terms of the package management.
yeah, no, this has been a huge gap in our ecosystem, like for a very long time. I like, where do you even start, right? Like, because there's the context of like Node and Node adoption and Node literally like a very literal hockey stick. Like, I have to wonder, like, did all these startup bros get the hockey stick from looking at the Node adoption charts? Because legit, like Node, it just blew up. And, I don't think anyone was ready for how quickly and how rapidly. But quite frankly, like it spoke to a need as well, because it wasn't just Node, right? It wasn't just like the convenience and like simplicity of JavaScript in many ways, but it was also our dependency management system, like, which I think is absolutely best in class. All software, like I will argue this with anybody, like there's nothing easier than npm install, and nothing easier asterisk also more unsafe than npx, right? Like install, right? So we win, and I think like part of Node's success was like its ecosystem and how easy it was to start like composing and building these blocks, to create applications or services or whatever really quickly, scripts, whatever. So like I feel like this, like how things moved, in the server side world for JavaScript. And then like you had React coming into the equation at some point, because like, React needs like a whole like marching band of tools in order to like actually compile, right? So they were like, sorry, y'all, Bower's not gonna cut it. We gotta use some more tooling here. We gotta go server side, So then you had this like front end ecosystem just kind of like massively come onto NPM as well, right? So that's another like thing that happened so quickly that we never really thought about, like, is this the best thing? How should we be handling this, right? So like, I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of like the speed of the internet is like a thing, and like it's hard to think. I mean, and standards are slow because they are thoughtful processes, and so it's like push pull. But anyways, we're gonna take a break. There's so much to discuss and unpack here. We're gonna compose ourselves, argue about how we want to spend our last 20 minutes, and then we'll be back. Okay. All right. Sorry, I totally went on a tangent.
For us, I was gonna basically just come back and ask, like, I mean, I don't know what exactly you've been working on in this space, but like, there are many ways, as you mentioned, like, you can do the code signing. You can do 2FA. Is like this provenance or whatever. Like, how do we? Is that like a reasonable to worry about? Is it just like, yeah, it might help a bit, but there's bigger wins. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we can talk about that in the third section if you'd like. I mean, these, because we're going to talk about solutions. We could talk about paying maintainers and the other kind of sustainability solutions, and then we can also talk about security solutions. I
can
personally
we talk about
think,
standards? I mean, I just ranted about standards, but I don't know if we actually have anything like viable to offer there in terms of like, we might not, and that's fine. We can just like end it on my rant, and like we don't need to like have a callback. I'm just saying, like, standards are for me like a part of like the solution long term, quite frankly. Like, and Chris said it too.
So some people propose like like NPM should have signing. I personally, I mean, we can talk about that. I actually don't think that's that certainly wouldn't have fixed this problem with Marak's packages.
Correct. Right.
He would have signed it, and then we would have all trusted it. So signing is kind of like, it helps if we should maybe talk about this on the podcast. But there's signing. There's 2FA. There's like actually analyzing the packages to see what they do, and getting like a nutrition facts label or like a report card kind of thing. Yeah. Actually, that's alluding back to what Amal said in her your analogy about the food in the car and like not knowing what the ingredients are. Like,
Certification.
Yeah. So I have a solution around that I want to shop with you all on the podcast. It has to do with signing to some degree and metadata, but also community adoption statistics as well. Like, what's your threshold for risk? You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're an organization, like, do you want to like say, hey, I want a community adoption threshold of like 80% before I like include, like, I don't know, whatever, like, just, I'm saying, how can we use community and herding to like maybe like usher this problem? But Chris, do you want to kick us off for this third segment? Like, because
Not really, but
no. Damn it, Chris.
Not really,
See,
but
this
I will.
is like, huh? You will? Okay, good.
No,
Kick us off. Wait,
No, I was just speaking on behalf of Chris, saying not really, but I will.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure.
Thank you, Chris.
We both. I thought, Chris, you said that. I was like, oh, great, Chris, yay. But yeah. Okay,
So,
you want to
like-
finish your thought? Sorry.
Like, this is very broad. Like, what if we tried to zero in on, okay, what can we do to avoid this particular problem? Because there are lots of different ways you can attack like an NPM package or whatever. But what could we do about this one?
Okay,
in
I think I like that. I
specific?
like that framing. Okay. Okay, so Tobie and Feross and Chris and myself, are we all comfortable with that as a constraint for our solutions discussion? Like, can you come up with good examples on that? Okay.
Yeah, and they'll
Okay.
completely explode it.
Yeah. Okay. That's
that's
fine.
okay.
You're the guest. You're allowed to. All right. Okay, folks. I will kick us off. Uno, dos, tres. All right, kids. So we're composed. I think we have a game plan for how we are going to discuss a massively ginormous topic with what I like to call lots of like tangent pitfalls, right? Like, we're like, I go on a tangent, like so and so goes on a tangent, right? So we're gonna try to give ourselves some constraints. So we're gonna talk about some solutions. to this super important problem with the constraint of how could we avoid this particular this particular situation with Marak. Okay, I'm gonna just start over. I'm sorry, I'm not happy with this intro. I'm gonna start over. We're gonna take advantage of like the fact that this is like an edited show. Okay. Compose myself. All right, kids. So I think we have some healthy constraints to help us get through brainstorming solutions for this last segment, because this is a giant topic and we could talk about it for hours. However, we don't have hours. So the constraint is, how do we come up with solutions that would have potentially helped us avoid the situation that happened with Marak's packages? Right? They he released something intentionally malicious. And it wasn't kind of like a secret thing, right? Things started showing up in your terminal or whatever. So I would say maybe like to some degree, like in some ways, this was like, it's an easy to find issue. However, it doesn't mean like, just because it's easy to find, like, doesn't mean that, we couldn't have mitigated it entirely in terms of like even including it into our updated application versions. So with that said, Feross and Tobie and Chris, solutions, folks. How could we avoid this?
I guess I'll just start by saying what I think wouldn't have helped, that often people will bring up in these discussions, because I think it's just helpful to take them off the table.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, I will start with signing is a thing people often talk about. So, they propose, let's have every maintainer sign their packages so that we know that the code has not been changed by npm or by any intermediary between the publisher's computer and the kind of final place where it runs. And sure, that helps. It's not a bad idea. We should probably do that. A lot of other package managers have that feature. apt, for example, in Linux has package signing, but it would not have helped at all in this particular incident. The person here we were worried about, the person who kind of inserted the malware into the package, was themselves the maintainer. So, they would have just simply signed the malware, and we would all be running it on our machines, and nobody would know the better. So, it's a nice idea. Unfortunately, it doesn't help at all with this incident. The second one I want to bring up is 2FA. So, it's not a requirement to have 2FA or two-factor authentication on your npm account, and a lot of people want that to become like a requirement, maybe it should be. But again, in this particular incident, it would not have helped, because the person we're worried about is the maintainer of the package, and they have their own 2FA device with them, and so they would have been able to use that to publish malware. So again, right. 2FA, not the solution in this situation. Mm-hmm. Let's see, anything else that's often brought up? I think possible solutions are, one is like, read every single line of code that you allow to run in your project. Audit every single line of code. That is one solution.
How sustainable is that? So we should give everything a sustainability score. This is like a new thing that new rule. So what's the sustainability? Sustainability or feasibility score? Maybe, I don't know.
I'm just throwing it out there because
No, it is a literal. Yeah, that's the brute force. That's like the brute force.
for certain projects like cryptocurrency projects, and for big companies like Google that have effectively unlimited resources, this is actually not a crazy idea. So Google will actually have their open source security team fully audit a package, and then they check it into their internal version control system, and they treat it as their own code. And so that is actually a solution for the most security critical projects, and for companies that have effectively unlimited resources. Obviously, the sustainability or the practicality of this approach for like a typical startup, or even a normal medium-sized, large-sized company is pretty low, because they don't have the skills probably to to understand all this code and the time and all that.
They may be able to buy that service from
Piggyback.
somebody who wants to provide it, like a curator of some, just like an audited version of the registry. And I'm sure that would sell pretty well.
There was an attempt by Node Source
But that's
to
a
do
big
that.
liability too, isn't it? It's like I think you're taking on a lot of liability doing that though. Like, because I don't want to guarantee somebody that this is safe, I swear, but I forgot that I forgot about automatic semicolon insertion and like, oh, sorry, like, I guess this code is dangerous, kids.
So
Like, I
Node,
mean, I wouldn't want to take on that guarantee. Like,
Node Source tried that, and
yeah. So
It-
what happened with
it-
Node Source?
They had a thing called certified modules that they were providing for a while, but to be honest, I don't know how it worked, and I don't think it was particularly widely adopted. But I don't know the reasons for that. That would be kind of interesting to find out. But there's been there've been ideas, at least people throwing around about like, why don't we just all pick a trusted subset of npm and just say like everyone should just use these trusted packages.
but it's every version of that package. It's not just
Right.
a package, right?
Yeah, so that's a lot of work, and who's going to do that work, and who's going to pay for that work?
Yeah.
So I also don't think that's very sustainable.
Right, and,
Yeah.
and as Chris was mentioning, I mean, you've audited the package once, wonderful. Now every time, I mean, I don't know how your life is around like maintaining open source software, but like I just get like pinged all the time because like there's a dependency that I have to update because there's like a security vulnerability somewhere. That probably doesn't really affect my project because I'm just using a bit of it, but I don't know, So like that's the other side of the coin, right? Which is, if we we have to audit every change, and we have to audit all of these changes like just in time, because we actually want to pull those patches in, because if not, we might be risking something else.
Yeah.
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 The thing that's so interesting about these Dependabot pull requests, or whatever bot service you're using to give you these pull
Renovate, Dependabot.
Renovate.
Yeah, there's so many of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, Renovate is
The thing-
definitely my favorite, by the way. Like, shameless plug, but yeah.
The thing that's so interesting about them, though, in my opinion, is that they help you keep your project up to date and avoid known vulnerabilities. So known vulnerabilities are vulnerabilities where some security researcher has found a problem in a package and made a report, and a CVE has been issued, which is like an official report with the National Vulnerability Database, and then now Dependabot can warn you that, hey, you should update because it resolves this issue. But what's so interesting about it is, like, if you just install Dependabot and you start just getting all these pull requests, I don't know about you all, but in my experience, I end up getting like 5 or 10 of them per day, and they're so overwhelming. And they're, I basically just read the change log and I say, does this seem fine? Did the test pass? Okay, fine, click merge, right? Because there's too many, and you're not actually reviewing the contents of the changes. And so what ends up happening is you have this unfortunate trade-off where, on the one hand, like, if you keep up to date, you're going to be safe from known vulnerabilities. But the more you do that, right, the more up to date you keep yourself, the more you're running code that has potentially only been published for like a day or two on npm. Like, you're updating to the thing that, like, that Marak updated yesterday, right? You're clicking merge on that PR because you're trying to keep up to date, and so now you're actually running code that no eyeballs have looked at, and so it's actually the case that some organizations choose to intentionally run to keep all their dependencies like 6 months out of date. With the exception of security fixes, just to avoid this problem of supply chain attacks that come in from from code that somebody published yesterday or a week ago that hasn't been caught yet. And so it's this really unfortunate trade-off. It's like, what are you more afraid of? Are you more afraid of supply chain like malware getting inserted by random bad actors, or are you more afraid of known vulnerabilities and you have to choose your poison?
Right. And the second problem for me, which is something you see a lot on the web, is just like fatigue around just approving stuff, right? You just click approve, I mean, it just got everyone in the habit of like,
Yeah, nobody wants
let's,
to be the billy goat that's standing in the way of progress either, right? There's also some social pressure to just keep it moving, like, you know
right,
what I mean?
absolutely.
That's we can't that's a real thing. Yeah, for us, for what it's worth, I think it's worth pointing out to folks that you can't. So the reason why I like Renovate is because it's highly configurable. So you can set your thresholds, you can batch, you can configure the bejesus out of it. But that being said, you're kind of to your point about this like 6 month delay to update. I personally feel like this is kind of like a way of doing some risk tolerance management, right? So, hey, I want to make sure that this thing is been adopted by other people and they've had no issues, and those people have moved on to the next thing, and before like I take this on, right? So it's some interesting social dynamics going on there. And I do think like there could be some. I think for me anyway, there's room for improving the metadata around how we expose those community adoption statistics so that folks can actually maybe actually configure their risk tolerance for like when to auto upgrade and when to not, right? So that would be like a nice thing I think to have also, to be honest.
If
Like,
a maintainer has their package and they have their own kind of policy around, okay, this is how often we're going to pull in these security updates or what have you, that might not align with the consumers of that package and what they expect and need as well, which is then you have people in the issue tracker complaining about why haven't you published an upgrade for this
yeah,
some
yeah,
medium severity fix in some CLI thing. Anyway, don't get me started on this,
yeah.
please.
Yeah.
Moving on.
No, yeah, no, I get it. I get it. No, like totally get it. I mean, like the time, so there's two interesting factors here. One is like the time machine aspect of dependency trees, right? Like they're like our packages are literally like there's time machines and they're snowflake time machines depending on your stack and your peer dependencies and blah 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 blah. I mean, like it can get crazy. But also quite frankly for me, like I think we have too much of a bias for like the latest and greatest software. Like I'm very conservative with my teams. Like I like being a major version behind on major projects that have like a pretty heavy like peer dependency ecosystem. Like for example, like if I have a React project, like I don't like being on the latest version of React because if I'm one version behind, it's usually safe in terms of everything else in the ecosystem, like more or less supporting it, right? Versus like upgrading right away and then like, oh, this bundler broke. Oh, this plugin doesn't have a thing for it yet. Like there's some benefit in, like we always try to push. I think like our bias towards like pushing new and being like very future oriented. Like we all try to adopt like the bleeding edge, and I don't understand why. Like why do we all feel the need to be on the bleeding edge? Like I don't, bleeding edge is not for everyone, and like I don't get that. I mean, I don't know, maybe you can share some insights, Tobie. Like
Well, I mean, it does go back to this tension though, because again, like it's either you're sort of like running like the latest patches, and so you're safe against known vulnerabilities, or you're not, right?
but security patches can be like patched in like let's say I have like 3 major versions of a project right now that I'm supporting in production. If I discover a security vulnerability that affects all of them, I can patch,
Well,
I could
yes,
patch
but not
all
every
those versions, right?
not every maintainer does that though.
Of course, yes, but what I'm trying to say again to discuss, like we're talking in an ideal world here, right? Like that is something that can be done, and like that could be a hygiene or a practice that we push, for not just like that doesn't have to fall on the maintainer. Like somebody else, like I could be rando Amal could like, like submit patches to fix older versions, right? Like we don't have to put that responsibility on the maintainer either. Like, I don't see why, like this just goes back to the whole sustainability thing. Like, like, I mean, do we feel like we have an adequate number of people even contributing to open source considering how many people use it, right? Like, and of course there's company and financial and lots of access issues that are in the way as well of that. But
And NPM doesn't make it very easy to, to start using like a fork of a package, right? It's a lot of overhead to fork a package, to publish it as another name, and then to like help people find it. So even if you did fix the security issues, and like if someone in the community wanted to fix security issues in an older major version, it's not easy to
right.
to help people find it. I mean, I personally think that like the happy solution here is to lean on tools to help us identify when packages do dangerous things. Because if you look at the supply chain attacks that have happened, like this Marak one, and then the other ones I mentioned earlier, like UA Parser.js and Koa and RC, like the way that the modules were the way that the packages were modified is like so obvious to anyone who even looked at the code that something really nefarious has just happened, and that I think it's we should have computers help us do this. I mean, computers are really good at noticing certain changes, very deterministic changes. So like, in those examples, all of those packages added install scripts, which means that when you go to install the NPM package, it's going to actually execute code immediately on your computer. And, I don't have data on this, but my intuition is that the number of times that a package that's really popular, that's been out for many, many years already, suddenly decides that it needs an install script is, the number of legitimate times that's happened is probably 0, or maybe it's a very small number that I could hold on one hand, right?
Yeah,
and so,
yeah.
so when that happened, it to me, the tooling should have told all of us as users of this software that, sure, the maintainer's claiming this is a patch version, but really this change is so severe, it's so disruptive that it ought to be treated as a major version change. And so all of our tooling should have like told us, hey, this package now has an install script. Hey, this package now talks to the network, right? Hey, this package now downloads an exe file and runs it on your computer.
Yeah, this package now has like new methods that talk to file system, like
yeah. And so
suddenly all of a sudden very chatty with your local directories.
And so I have to say I'm actually working on a thing that does what I just said, so I'm kind of biased. I'm promoting my preferred solution, but I do think that that we need something like this, because we can't review all the code by hand, and we certainly can't just close our eyes and hope for the best and just run this code and hope for the best. And I think a middle ground is really nice, where you use some tooling, some static analysis tooling, to kind of tell you what does it look like this package is doing. And when you notice a really drastic change in behavior that indicates that the maintainer may have gone rogue, or a new maintainer may have actually been a malicious actor and not just a normal person, that we can use those signals to alert people before they update to those dangerous versions. But yeah, that's I think where we need to go, because I don't think the solution is to have everybody read every line of code, or to
this is not going to work.
To just
People
yeah,
do
that's
that, right? I mean,
right.
And I think there's another thing that we have to be wary of, right? It's one of the huge value of having open source and being part of the open source ecosystem is to be pushing changes upstream, right? If to run everything safely, everyone has essentially to have their own sort of like local patched versions of everything. This is actually going back in time like a lot, and it comes with lots of other issues. Unpatched software is doing a lot of damage, right?
Yeah.
So we can't this is not a thing where we can say, oh, let's just back out of this thing. The reason why we're trying to keep things updated is to avoid unpatched software. And you had this really good point earlier, which is we can't just shift left and move all of that up to the maintainers to do. I agree with this.
Yeah.
However, if we don't do that, it either means that we can have tooling in the middle that's really good, or that all of us do that separately on our end. So I actually spoke about this in a talk about the priority of constituencies, That's a concept that comes out of like the web standardization, and that essentially says that because if you're writing a spec, you're impacting all of the people actually developing the browsers, who are themselves impacting all of the people developing apps, who are themselves impacting users. You have a much higher responsibility. And it's normal to sort of like shift the work towards you, because 1 hour of your time is going to save 1,000 hours of browser implementer time, and millions of hours of et cetera, right?
Right.
And so we don't have a system like this for open source, and we probably should, because the thing, like a maintainer fixing a problem solves the problem for literally everyone that's downstream of them, right? So that's something that's really valuable. However, the problem is that in that dependence, in that priority of constituencies, when you have players that are high up that dependency, like a spec editor or an open source maintainer, they have to be supported by the folks that are below. Right? So essentially, you have to have a flow of resources going up to sort of deal with the fact that they're having a lot of work to do, because it makes more sense for that work to happen left, to be shifted left, right? But you can't just ask people to shift, to take on more work, but then not support them.
Right.
When I first heard of this, like Google was starting to push this S-bomb, or I think it was, or some sort of, it had some sort of initiative where they want this, all these open source projects to adopt these standards, or maybe it was Microsoft. I don't remember who came up with this stuff, but I was like, oh, great. Now it's a huge company that, it's $1 trillion company or whatever, that wants me to do more work for free.
Right. That doesn't work.
Oh, like,
right?
oh my God, forget that. Like, I don't even, honestly, I was trying to avoid this part because this is such a huge topic. Like, really, like, this is like going to set me off on a giant tangent, but I will say this very, very quickly. Like, the fact that, like, folks at TypeScript, like, God bless them, right? Whatever. They made a patch into Babel that was so huge because, like, for anybody listening who uses TypeScript and Node and JavaScript, I just want to say that, like, highly recommend using the Babel parser for TypeScript, because really, like, you want to use TypeScript compiler to handle types, and you want to use the Babel TypeScript plugin to really manage all your transpiling, because you want to really leverage. Babel is a much better transpiler than TypeScript. So just for what it's worth. And so the ecosystem, like, folks have started to really widely acknowledge this, and Microsoft is like, yeah, we really, should just start contributing to the Babel plugin. They created this giant patch that just created so much work for the Babel maintainers, and, like, that's not cool. Like, what is this? Like, people, like, working full time are, like, making so much work for people working on a community run project that's extremely critical to our, like, ecosystem, without making formal time to, like, contribute a butt ton of money as well, or, like, resources or whatever to help. I mean, that's that's just an example of, like, that pushing it down in a way that's not conducive or productive, or and quite frankly, like, harmful and contributing to maintainer burnout, right? Like, so
one thing, I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand is, oh, well, I sent a PR to this project. Am I not helping? Right? And in some cases, no. You're making more work.
Well, yeah, and there's this really weird incentive in the open source ecosystem right now. Well, there's a number of maintainers that are trying to make both ends meet by getting contributions and sponsorship, right? But what sells a sponsorship is actually a new feature, right? So you have this completely wild situation where you're looking for money to maintain a project. And in order to have money in, you have to create more features or build new things. So, before you had N features to maintain and no money, right? And now you have N plus 1 features to maintain, and you still don't have money to maintain those. Right? You've had, it doesn't, it's literally not sustainable.
Right. Literally. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So with that said, we could talk about this forever. Tobie, I'm going to give you last word. What's an organization one that folks can adopt today. If I was like, hey, JavaScript party listener, hey, changelog listener, adopt this one thing today in your organizations to make it easier for your the phenomenal maintainers that give us so much of their time and energy to like make the internet a better place. So what's one thing, Tobie? No pressure.
So that's the only way that I can actually answer was one thing.
This was a trap. I knew we were doomed to like whenever
Well,
like
it's
you
gonna get
can't say
worse.
the word one with Tobie
No,
and
but
like
that, no,
one.
but I will. I
Okay.
will, but it's
All
a
right,
lot
let's
more
do this.
burdensome than if it
Okay.
was multiple things.
Okay, fine.
the
I'll maybe okay. We can change it to multiple things if
The
if
only
that's easier.
thing that will change this situation
Mm-hmm.
is a mindset shift. Literally. Because what we have is a systemic problem of an ecosystem that we all rely on and need to function in a different way. And we have to address the systemic issues behind that. And if we don't, we can sort of continue patching our way through. That's fine. It's going to be fine for a little while, then it's going to get a little worse, and then it's going to get a little more worse. And there's some point, like in the really close future, where large organizations will effectively be duplicating all of their vendoring everything and having the funds to do that, and small organizations won't. And we're going to get even more security issues that are going to affect people more. We're seeing this in Switzerland now. Like so many small state-level organizations with like private data about citizens, like who their spouses, their children, their bank accounts, like how much money they make, where they're working, etc. Like their address is like on the dark net. Like there's not one day where this doesn't happen. Why? Because we have really small organizations relying on software that they don't understand, and because there is no sort of like upstream sense of making sure that the stuff is sustainable and safe. So
Yeah.
like we're like, if we don't have a mindset shift, like I am not like in a positive mood about this whole thing. However, I do believe that a mindset shift hasn't ever been that close as it is today. People are understanding the relationship between security and sustainability, right? And that's key. That's super important. And so I have like, for me, there's like three specific things that we need to do to sort of like go forward with this. The first one is organizations that are relying on open source software, i.e. everyone that is using software, right? If you're building software, you're building on top of open source. Like, no one else, like, there's no other way at this point, right? I mean, except like, super, super specific circumstances. But those folks need to understand that they're not buying that software from somewhere, right? Like they're part of a broader ecosystem that they have to collaborate into.
I'm just
No,
laughing because I just
really.
realized this was one thing. But you know what? I was like, but yes, I agree. Yeah, no,
It's true.
yes to everything, Tobie. It's absolutely true. Honestly, like the topic I was really trying to avoid was like, what does it mean for us to like have all these big companies enter open source and for us to lose it's like muscles, like how when you don't work out for a while, and then you're like, what's going on with my muscles? It's like, oh, they're atrophying because you don't use them, right? So I'm wondering if we're starting to atrophy our muscles around community driven open source, because I'm seeing more and more people in the JavaScript community adopt packages that are like maintained and created by these large companies. And like you said, at any point, a company can just close their source or do something else that's private and for them in terms of how they maintain stuff, right? And maybe it's a competitive edge for them. Maybe their biggest competitor is using a package of theirs and they
So
change the licensing, or who
yes,
knows,
I
right? Like
wasn't
there's
even
so
going
many.
there. I
Yeah,
wasn't even
yeah.
going there.
I know
But
you
yes.
weren't going there, but I mean that's one of the things that keeps me up at night, and like it's concerning to me because I see projects like, even just again, sorry to pick on Microsoft here, but they're an easy target. Like Rush and Lerna, right? Like that's like another good example of like community versus, corporate driven. And like, I like I don't know, I just don't want us to lose that muscle of having good practices that are community run and universally available, because we can't have corporations set boundaries for us in open source. And I'm just worried about that. I really am. Like, I don't know if you are, Chris, you're nodding. So, are you like, is this an invalid fear? Like,
I don't think so. I think it's
Yeah.
valid. Yeah, it's.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
I think a lot of these companies have shown us who they are. Really, I mean.
yeah,
So,
They're corporations. They're not nonprofits. I mean, just saying,
Right.
like, I don't. I mean, I am not particularly upset when I see a corporation doing what's good for their bottom line. I mean, this is
Right.
literally their job. You know.
right.
I mean, sure, it might
Yeah.
impact their brand, et cetera, but I think like
Right.
we have to sort of grow up to that. Like, this is the
Right.
reality. Is that's the reality.
Right. Well, so like I said, we officially had lots of tangents, but I think they were productive and necessary. This is an important topic, so we appreciate you hopefully enjoying this ride with us. And I just remember, I think Tobie's one thing was like a mindset shift. So Toby, where can folks learn more about what you do and find you on the internet? And
So
like,
on this topic, I think like the easiest is just to follow me on Twitter. I'm just at Tobie on that's my Twitter handle.
oh wait, it's not
Because I'm
at
old.
Old Man Shakes Fist at Cloud. I thought that was your no.
I should probably redirect.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No. That's great. And then like, do you have any projects or any talks or anything that you want to highlight for folks?
Well, I mean, I'm going to be talking a lot about this in the upcoming month because I think it's an important topic, and I think the community and our industry is actually ready to listen to this. So there's clearly going to be more on this topic. And we didn't look at all of them. I mean, there's lots of areas that we could have talked about that we haven't. So there's going to be plenty of opportunity to actually have those conversations in the upcoming month. So yeah,
Excellent.
absolutely.
All right. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you. Thank you for being wonderful co-guests, co-panelists, Feross and Chris. And we will talk to everyone next week. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.
thank
Bye
you.
for now.